All right, so we're diving into Ulta Beauty today, and you've really given me a stack of stuff here. We've got like 10Ks, 10Qs, even their clawback policy document. But really what we want to get out of this deep dive is a good understanding of their business model. How does Ulta make money? What are some of the costs they're dealing with? And really, how do they stand out in this beauty world?
Yeah, it's always interesting to kind of peel back the layers of a company like this, right? One that we interact with so often, and really just kind of see what makes them tick, especially with all this talk about how retail is changing and kind of where things are going.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, just starting with the basics, their bread and butter is selling beauty products. I mean, every time I walk into Ulta, it's thousands of products from all different price points,
Yeah.
all different kinds of brands.
Yeah, they've got over 25,000 products according to their latest 10K, which is just
Oh, wow.
when you
Ooh.
think about the logistics of all that. But there's something interesting in one of their older 10Ks back in 2023. They said that 76% of their loyalty members only shopped in stores during that year. So it kind of shows you that even though online shopping is so huge, there's still something about that in-person beauty experience that's drawing people in.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Uh,
is it the ability to test products out or to actually talk to like a beauty consultant and get some advice?
Yeah.
Or maybe just the whole experience of being in that beauty space?
It's probably a combination of all of those things, but before we dive too deep into like the whole customer experience side of things, I think it's worth unpacking Ulta's revenue streams a little bit more because it's not just about selling products like you said.
Okay, so there's more to it than just lipstick and eyeshadow palettes. I'm
Yeah.
intrigued.
Yeah, so if you look closely at their financial reports,
Yeah.
you'll see they've got some less obvious sources of income, for example. They have their own private label credit card program, just like any other credit card issuer. That generates revenue through interest and fees and stuff.
Oh, yeah, of course. We
Yeah.
didn't think about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of retailers do that.
Exactly. And then you've got their partnership with Target, creating those little Ulta beauty shops inside Target stores. Now, that's not direct product sales for Ulta, but it does bring in some royalty income based on how well those shops perform.
That's really smart. A way to expand without having to build a bunch of new stores.
Exactly. And then there's another one that often gets overlooked, even by like seasoned investors. And it has to do with their loyalty programs and gift card breakage.
Gift card breakage.
Yeah, you know how sometimes you get a gift card and it ends up just sitting in a drawer somewhere and you never actually use it? Well, that unused balance is pure profit for the company. And when you have a massive loyalty program like Ulta does, with millions of members, those little amounts can really add up.
Wow, that's fascinating. It seems like they're really diversifying their revenue streams, not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But of course, all that revenue comes with a cost.
Right.
What are some of the biggest expenses that Ulta has to deal with?
Well, let's start with the most obvious one. Acquiring all those thousands of products from their brand partners. You know, they carry over 25,000 products. So just imagine the cost of buying all that inventory.
Yeah, and it's not just the upfront cost of buying the products. It's the cost of storing them
Yeah.
and transporting them
Yeah.
and managing all those relationships with the brands. Speaking of relationships, I was looking at their 10K filings, and I noticed that Ulta doesn't have any long-term supply agreements with their brand partners. Doesn't that seem a little bit risky?
It's kind of a double-edged sword on the one hand. It gives them a lot of flexibility. They're not locked into contracts, so they can quickly adapt to changing trends, bring in new brands, and stay on top of what's hot. But on the other hand, like you said, it makes them very dependent on maintaining those strong relationships with the brands. If those relationships go sour, their access to those sought-after products could be at risk.
That's a good point. It's a trade-off between flexibility and stability.
Yeah.
So besides the cost of goods, what other big expenses are eating into Ulta's profits?
Well, their 10K reports actually lay out some of their key cost drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, running over 1,300 stores across the country isn't cheap. You've got rent, utilities, labor costs, all those expenses associated with keeping the stores running.
Right, and I imagine those costs can fluctuate quite a bit, depending on the location of the store
Yeah.
and just the overall economic climate.
Absolutely. And then you have to factor in their investments in marketing and technology. In today's digital age, you can't just rely on foot traffic and traditional advertising. Ulta is constantly innovating their digital platforms, personalizing the online shopping experience, and using data to drive customer engagement. All of that requires significant investment.
It seems like they're really trying to find that sweet spot between their physical presence and their online presence. It's like you need both in today's retail world, but it makes you wonder how sustainable that balance is in the long run.
That's a great question, and it's definitely one we want to explore further as we dig deeper into Ulta's strategies and the challenges they face. For now, I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and talk about what Ulta actually offers its customers and how they differentiate themselves in such a competitive market.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we talked about how Ulta makes money and kind of what it costs them to do business, but the really fascinating part is how they've carved out this place for themselves in such a crowded beauty market.
Yeah, you've got department stores and boutiques and online giants like Amazon. I mean, even drugstores are stepping up their beauty game these days. So how does Ulta stand out from the crowd?
Their 2024 10K lays out their core value proposition pretty clearly, and it boils down to three things: a huge product assortment, those in-store salon services, and then, of course, their loyalty program.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds pretty standard. I mean, a lot of beauty retailers offer those things to some degree. What makes Ulta's approach different?
It's about how they weave those things together to create this unique customer experience. Think about where you usually find Ulta stores. They're in those high-traffic, convenient locations. You know those power strip centers
Yeah.
that you can easily just zip in and out of? They actually talk about targeting those areas specifically in their 10K.
I get it. It's about accessibility, being easy to find. So you can pop in for a quick lipstick, or you can spend an hour browsing.
Exactly. And once you're inside, they hit you with that massive selection of products, something for every budget,
Yeah.
from drugstore brands to the high-end stuff. They really emphasize that in their 10K, this idea that they cater to a really broad cross-section of customers.
I can see that. I mean, personally, I get totally overwhelmed by too much choice sometimes. So having a curated selection, even across different price points, is actually really appealing. But what about the salon services? Where do those fit into the bigger picture?
That's where Ulta goes beyond being transactional and taps into that experiential side of beauty. Having a salon right there in the store elevates the entire shopping experience. You can get a haircut, a brow wax,
Uh,
a makeover. It all feeds into that beauty destination feel.
I bet it also helps drive their loyalty program. People are getting rewarded for spending on both products and
Oh,
services.
got it. Their loyalty program is huge. And it's not just about discounts. They're gathering tons of data
Yeah.
and using it to personalize the customer experience, tailoring recommendations, offering special promotions, really trying to create a more individual feel for each shopper.
It's almost like they're trying to bridge the gap between online and in-store shopping, using technology to replicate that personal touch you might get from a beauty consultant.
That's a great observation. And it really gets at the heart of how Ulta is trying to stand out. It's not just about product selection or even price. It's about creating that human connection. They actually use that phrase in their 10K.
Okay, so we have a good picture of their value proposition and how they're trying to differentiate themselves. But none of that matters if they can't actually execute on it operationally. What are the critical activities that keep Ulta running smoothly behind the scenes?
It's a pretty complex operation, especially when you consider those 1,300 plus stores
Hmm.
and that massive product catalog. Obviously, inventory management is huge. They have to constantly balance buying opportunities with making sure they're getting a good return on their inventory investment, which is tricky without those long-term supply agreements we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that lack of long-term contracts definitely gives them flexibility, but it also means they have to be really good at forecasting trends and managing those brand relationships.
Exactly. In their 10K, they talk about having this disciplined approach to buying and a dynamic allocation process that uses real-time sales data to adjust inventory levels at different stores. So they're constantly analyzing what's selling where and making sure the right products are available at the right time.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, honestly.
Oh.
But it also shows how sophisticated they are in using data and technology to optimize their operations.
You're getting it. And it doesn't stop with inventory management. Supply chain management is another critical piece of the puzzle. Getting all those products from various manufacturers
Right.
to their distribution centers
Hmm.
and then out to the stores or directly to customers, it takes a really well-oiled machine.
Especially with all the supply chain issues we've seen in recent years, I bet that's a constant battle.
Absolutely. And then you have to factor in the people side of things. Ulta has thousands of employees across their stores, distribution centers, and corporate offices. Their 10K emphasizes talent acquisition and development as a key part of their strategy. They need to find and retain skilled employees. Everyone from the beauty advisors who provide that human connection to the supply chain experts and data analysts working behind the scenes.
So it's not just about systems and processes, it's about the people who make it all work. Which brings us back to something you mentioned earlier. How sustainable is this whole model in the long run? Can Ulta really keep thriving in this constantly changing retail landscape?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's definitely something we'll be exploring in more detail as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Ulta Beauty.
Okay, so we've really unpacked a lot about Ulta, their revenue streams, their
Hmm.
costs, the whole customer experience they've built. But the big question in my mind is like, can they keep this up?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that might be coming down the pike for them?
I think it's interesting because some of their biggest strengths right now could actually become weaknesses if they're not careful. Like we talked about those physical stores being so important for that human connection. But what happens as online shopping keeps growing? Can they really afford to keep investing so heavily in those brick and mortar stores?
Yeah, it's expensive to run all those stores,
Yeah.
especially as rents and operating costs keep going up. And then there's the whole challenge of trying to recreate that personalized experience online. It feels like a really tough thing to do.
It is. They can't just abandon those stores. They're too core to their brand. But they also can't ignore the fact that people are shopping online more and more. It's a tough balancing act.
Maybe they could do things like virtual consultations
Mm.
or personalized product recommendations based on your browsing history.
That's the kind of thinking they're going to need. And it's not just about technology. They have to keep their finger on the pulse of what consumers want. The beauty industry changes so fast. What's hot today could be old news tomorrow.
Which brings us back to those brand relationships. If they don't have the hottest products and the most sought-after brands, customers might start going somewhere else.
Exactly. And it's not just about having the right products anymore. Consumers are also looking for brands that align with their values, transparency, sustainability, all of that. Ulta's going to need to make sure they're showcasing brands that check those boxes and that their own operations are environmentally and socially responsible.
So it's a lot to keep track of. Staying on top of trends,
Yeah.
managing those costs, figuring out the supply chain, making sure they're appealing to those evolving values, and all while trying to maintain that human connection that they're known for. Seems like risk management is a huge part of their success.
Speaking of risk management, remember that clawback policy document we saw? That's not something you see every day. It seems like they're really serious about financial performance and holding their executives accountable.
Yeah, it's like they're sending a message that they're in it for the long haul, that they're thinking about sustainability, not just in terms of the environment, but in terms of their business practices as a whole.
Exactly. So the big question is, can they maintain that agility?
Mm.
Can they anticipate those future trends? And can they hold on to that human connection as they continue to grow and change?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We looked at Ulta's different revenue streams, the challenges they face with their costs, and that unique customer experience they've created. It's a story of constant evolution, strategic adaptation, and really the power of beauty in a world that's constantly changing.
And like always, we encourage you to keep digging deeper, ask those tough questions, and draw your own conclusions because that's where the real value of this kind of deep dive lies.
Until next time, keep diving deep.